Ever since they started setting up the Thunderbolts in the MCU, it's been a project that we've been very excited about. Not only is this team made up of some of our favorites, they're also the most complex and gray characters that exist in the universe, and for that reason, we feel it could be one of the greatest MCU films to date if they utilize these characters to their full potential.
When it was confirmed who would be on the team, in some ways it wasn't the roster we expected, especially when there was a lot of overlap as far as powers and abilities are concerned. But once we saw that Sentry was going to play a part in the movie, it clued us into how all the characters were linked and are actually perfect inclusions.
What these characters all have in common is a history of being controlled or manipulated, which turned them into what they are today. While most of them have since broken away from the institutions that made them, they seem to now be somewhat lost, unsure of how to feel fulfilled when trauma and violence is all they've ever known and all they feel they are destined to offer. We have John Walker and Red Guardian, both characters who devoted themselves to being a symbol for what their country stands for. In John's case, we even hear him talk about how he essentially ruined himself with questionable methods and trauma, elements that eventually drove him to the edge when faced with the opportunity for redemption. But both characters ultimately end up feeling used and abandoned after giving everything.
Then we have Ghost, who was weaponized from a young age by S.H.I.E.L.D. and eventually blackmailed into continued service with the promise of a cure for her painful affliction. When last we heard about Ghost, Ant-Man and the Pym Van Dynes were trying to bring her more relief or even a cure, but after the blip in Endgame, we have no idea if they were able to follow through on bringing her the help she needed. So it's possible that by the time of Thunderbolts, if she's had to seek out alternative means of treatment, she may be once again being forced to compromise her own humanity just to survive.
Then the rest of the team members, Yelena, Taskmaster, and Bucky, have all literally been brainwashed into complete subjugation before. While Yelena and Taskmaster will likely be struggling with what identity remains to them, Yelena in particular with the shroud of Natasha hanging over her, Bucky has already come a long way in his recovery. This puts him in a unique position to still be able to relate to the rest of the team and learn with them, but ultimately play more of a guiding and leading role in the growth these characters can go through.
Our guess is that Bucky may be in the midst of an overcorrection with his bid for a position as a senator. After Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we know that his goal was to take ownership over his life and to take solid action in making amends for what he's done. His avenue for doing this seems to be through Congress, and while he was hopeful at first that this would be a good way to do things by the book and promote nonviolent change, we suspect that he may be feeling somewhat disillusioned by the time we catch up with him. We may see him frustrated and disappointed at the lack of good he's actually able to do from within a broken system, and eventually find a middle ground by being involved in the Thunderbolts team.
So each of these characters is likely to be in a dark place, searching for purpose or peace after the psychological torment they've each endured. We're hoping that the team will maybe at first be lured back into the idea of working for someone else again, likely Valentina, but then when pushed to the limits of even their morality, will realize they've just regressed to the life they already broke away from, and will draw a line and choose for themselves rather than follow orders. They'll realize that the fulfillment they crave won't come from doing Valentina's dirty work, but by establishing a moral code of their own.
Now we think the key piece in having all of this click for them will be Sentry. Sentry is a character who's historically very psychologically troubled, which would fit perfectly into this narrative. Part of his power, the Void, is essentially a monstrous and uncontrollable physical manifestation of his psychological trauma.
What better antagonist for these broken characters to contend with than the Void, an embodiment of mental scars? And how fitting would it be for them to throw all their violence against this enemy to no avail, only to realize they can only hope to stop it by helping Bob and themselves to heal.
If the Thunderbolts are being sent to capture or eliminate Sentry, maybe they'll eventually realize how alike they are to him, and that by harming him instead of helping him, they will just be doing to him what their own tormentors did to them.
Now, we want to specify that we don't think the Thunderbolts should just become goody two-shoes heroes after addressing their trauma. We hope that these gray characters can continue to operate in a gray zone, perhaps taking more extreme measures than the Avengers would be willing to, but ultimately still doing things for the right reasons. Especially when you consider what Bucky's takeaway from all of this might be. He may seek to utilize the Thunderbolts to promote overall positive change through semi-questionable methods, used exclusively on those who deserve it, like corrupt politicians or destructive groups that for bureaucratic reasons are untouchable to the authorities or the Avengers.
When these are all characters with a history of being used, there's great potential for them to go through some very interesting growth without compromising the depth of their characters. Through their choices to reject controlling authority and to accord compassion to Sentry and themselves, we think this team could have a very powerful journey of healing and self-actualization, without taking anything away from what makes these characters some of our favorites.